councillors will attend, members of the public, as well. As usual, the agenda papers and the public forum submissions are available on the council's website. I'd like to draw your attention to the emergency evacuation procedure, which is outlined on the agenda, currently being displayed on the screen. And this meeting is being webcast, so anyone who wants to speak, please speak into the microphone to make sure you can be heard. Agenda item 2 on a public forum, just that a reminder that, as usual, statements and questions will be taken at the time the relevant agenda item is being discussed. I'll reply to the questions or ask the relevant cabinet member to respond. Agenda item 4, apologies for absence. No apologies today. Yeah, everyone's here. Yeah, we've got a full house today, which is great. Agenda item 4, declarations of interest. Any cabinet members have any declarations in relation to today's agenda? No? Okay. Agenda item 5, matters referred for consideration by scrutiny or full council. I understand there have been none on this occasion. None, Tony? Okay. Agenda item 6, reports from scrutiny commissions. There are none today. Okay, on to agenda item 7, chair's business. I'm just going to share 3 things with you. First, on the Voi e-scooter pilot extension request that's been submitted to the Department for Transport. So government have announced plans to legalise e-scooters and introduce powers to regulate rental schemes. It's a process that's expected to take 18 months, and the Department for Transport has invited authorities to extend their e-scooter trial schemes up to May 2024. And obviously we're keen to be a part of that. We think that the scooter scheme has been very successful for us, with more than 6 million rides in Bristol. So a formal extension request needs to be made to DFT, that's the Department for Transport, to enable the scheme to continue. If it's not made, then the current scheme would cease. So the request is only to extend the legal order that permits the trial. It does not commit authorities to delivery of a scheme for that full duration. Continuing the trials will allow us to gain more experience to inform how any future permanent scheme is going to be set up and managed, and a permanent scheme will include e-bikes as well as e-scooters, which has always been one of the challenges for Bristol and its hills. So the proposed legislation will legalise private e-scooters as well as rental ones, which is something that we've been calling for to legalise and regulate. And it will specify minimum standards for scooters that are used and sold. I will share that we've raised a number of times with the Police Crime Commissioner, myself and Don have raised the issue of e-scooters and these electric motorbikes as well, that are sometimes ridden on pavements and in public parks as well. So this is we welcome this move as a way of allowing us to catch up with the way people are actually living right now. Secondly, on COP27, so as much as to say, I want to start with the government's position. I understand, as of just an hour ago, I was told that the Prime Minister has now said he is going to go to COP. I'm relieved about that. Not that I think that's the sole answer, but I think when I first heard that the Prime Minister had said he wasn't going to go to COP, one is I thought there was an absolute lack of understanding of what COP was. It's not just a place to go and wear the T-shirt and make the statement. For the world's cities at the moment, particularly off the back of COP26, COP is the place that cities are going to connect with the finance they need to go on that journey of decarbonisation. There is no decarbonisation without investment in retrofitting homes, putting in new heat systems, putting in heat networks, investing in mass transit systems. All of that takes investment. It's not all in the public purse, it's in the private finance as well. And off the back of the COP in Glasgow last year, while there were many ways, there were clearly a number of very high-profile ways in which COP underperformed. What we were relieved about to some extent was at last a recognition that cities were going to be at the front end of the world's decarbonisation. Most of the world live in cities. They got density on offer. That offers greater efficiencies, and they can move faster than national governments. But then, obviously, Mark Carney also talked about $140 trillion moving around the world. So the aim has been to align finance, places, and technology. But it's the financial innovation that's needed to allow the technology to be rolled out. And my hope for the Prime Minister was that they would understand that and go to COP with a commitment to working with us at the UK's biggest cities to connect with the finance we need. Apart from the fact that a Prime Minister should be a global leader anyway, and particularly when you talk about climate change, there are no hard boundaries between global issues and domestic issues, anyway. I'll be going to COP myself as part of 3CI, along with Susan Aitken, who's the leader of Glasgow, who hosted COP last year, and obviously I'm chair of Core Cities now. Our real drive in COP is to begin to connect the near £300 billion worth of decarbonisation opportunities we've identified across the UK's biggest cities with the finance that will be in COP. It's not, like I said, it's not going to happen if we're reliant on government spending and government money, and it's not going to happen if we rely on government making the case for us. We have to go there and make the case ourselves. I'd say that the case we make at COP is not just for Bristol, it is for the UK cities, but there's also a very strong international angle to this, in that we're making the case for cities all over the world. So no doubt one of the big areas of challenge is how do we get the finance for the RAP to cover and shape the rapid urbanisation that's happening in the global south, which if it happens in a chaotic manner, not only will it compound the climate change challenges brought about by chaotic, unplanned, inefficient urbanisation, but if urbanisation isn't helped to happen in the global south in an orderly manner, we will add on top of climate change to the already growing burden of climate-driven migration. And we're looking at 150 million climate-driven migrants by the middle of this century unless we get ahead of it. So the case we're making is for UK cities, but for cities in the global south as well, and how we make sure international finance begins to work with the way the world is. I'll be going to this meeting that's now been trailed heavily, but we didn't know it was a publicly known about, so we kept it quiet. But King Charles has invited a number of people to Buckingham Palace on Friday for a pre-COP reception. I think the Prime Minister is due to be there now at last. So again, one of the points we'll be making there is, as we go to COP, what we don't need is the British government in one room having its conversations and representatives of the UK cities in another. We need to get national government aligned with local government, so we go there with a coherent UK approach, and then we can make sure that national government is actually supporting us to get done what we want to get done. I'd be very happy to talk more about our approach to COP with anyone who has an interest. The third thing I'll just share with you is that it won't have escaped anyone's notice that we have a very challenging financial world around us at the moment, particularly in the UK. We have a cost of living crisis. I talked in my State of the City on Wednesday of a cost of operating crisis. What I mean by that is not only are not only are individuals and households facing these unprecedentedly challenging challenges of just living, but those very organisations that are most needed in times of this kind of crisis are also facing challenges of just operating. Inflation in wages, heating bills, food supply, inflation in materials for the infrastructure we're trying to build, and housing and so forth. It's an incredibly challenging time, to put it mildly. If you bring that to the Bristol City Council, it looks at the moment like a best case scenario around about £37 million in savings for 23-24. Worst case, that's about 10% of our budget. Worst case scenario goes north of 62 million. At the moment, we are just about to go out early next week to the public with a number of proposals that we have to take to you to talk about how we will balance our budget. As much as to say, as well in that, there are no longer any red lines. There is no pain-free future available to local government anywhere in the country right now. So whereas we would talk with absolute commitment on our libraries, our children's centres, our council tax reduction scheme, travel to school. Everything is now on the table. That sounds bad, but the alternative of that comes as a consequence of not balancing the budget is worse. In that government then send in their own civil servants to balance the budget on our behalf. They take control of the local authority and they do it to you with no engagement, no local knowledge, and dare I say, with very little compassion. And that has happened. Inspectors have been sent into other authorities in the country. So our challenge is to navigate our way through this challenge, minimizing the harm to the city. And it's not just a local government impact, it's happening across the public sector as well. Other sectors are being impacted. We will go out early next week to the public. The challenge we face as well is on top of the existing challenge of us meeting that financial envelope, we are left with a high degree of uncertainty. Having harmed the economy, if I put it lightly, government have not been very open with us about what they are going to do to stand with local government right now. So we go out early next week, but we're then waiting for the autumn statement, which is going to be on the 21st of November. We can't wait till the 21st of November before we go to the public to find out whether government are going to recognise, national government are going to recognise the challenge facing local government. We have to go it now because of the time frame for our budget in February. So we're going to come out with some proposals. We then wait to see what government will do on the 21st of November. But assure us to say their position will have huge consequences for the financial viability of local governments all across the country. And it will have huge implications for our ability or inability to operate in a manner that people have become accustomed to in terms of the services we provide and the interventions we make in the city. I don't think it's possible to overstate the scale of the challenge we face as local government across the country, and obviously have a particular interest in Bristol. So on that note, let me go on to agenda item 8, and that's
thank you, Mayor. The Council has a statutory duty to provide an impartial, confidential and accessible information, advice and support to parents of children with special educational needs and or disabilities. And this includes advice on education, social care and health-related topics. This duty is currently met by our SENDIASS service, which it stands for Send Information, Advice and Support Service. And the aim is to commission that in line with the 2019 National Minimum Standards for SENDIASS services. Both Bristol City Council, North Somerset Council, South Gloucestershire Council and Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire Integrated Care Board will be working collaboratively to jointly commission a regional service. The contract will run for initially 2 years from the 1st of April 2023, with an option to extend for a further 12 months up to the 31st of March 2026. Bristol City Council will be the lead commissioner for this regional service. The annual budget will be £331,492 and Bristol's annual contribution will be £140,000. Therefore, the combined spending commitment for 3 years is just under £1 million at £994,470. The new contract will deliver a year-round flexible service which is open during normal office hours, including a direct helpline, 24-hour answering machine service and callback service and signposting. The service currently has a website and social media presence, and that will continue, and that provides accessible, accurate, and as we said, impartial information. Just to give you some statistics in terms of the use of the service, as of January 2022, there were 63,254 children on roll in Bristol schools. Of that, 11,689 children have special educational needs. Of that number, 3,639 children and young people aged from 0 to 25 years in Bristol have an educational health and care plan, and around a third of those with the HCPs are for young people over the age of 16. The service currently offered needs to, or will proposing to be offered, will work directly with the of key indicators, and they are set out in the report. But again, I just wanted to turn to some of the feedback that we've had from parents, carers and young people in relation to how well regarded the service is. And we have exceeded all of our targets. For example, we surveyed 1,000 telephone service users who agreed to give feedback. 99% said they were either satisfied or very satisfied with the service. The target was 80%. Of 710 people who agreed to give feedback, so they could access the service when they needed and in the way they wanted, 97% said that they could and the target was 90%. Over 70% of parents, carers and young people felt more confident, and 45% felt that they had a better understanding of the SEND code of practice. The number of young people receiving direct information, advice and support work is increasing and is on track to be above target in the current financial year. The service is also undertaking outreach in diverse communities, and the percentage of black and minoritized service users worked with is well above part target. So the commissioning strategy commits us to recommission the SENDIASS service. So therefore, the recommendations in front of you today is to authorise our Executive Director of People in consultation with myself to take all steps required to jointly commission with partner authorities and enter into a regional SENDIASS service for 2+1 years from the 1st of April 2023, and also to note the consultation report in Appendix B. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Asha. We've had no public forum or questions on this. Any Cabinet members wish to comment? Okay, well, thanks very much, Asha. It's been a very challenging area to work in. Thanks for your leadership on this. Let me hand back to you now to take the decision which I support.
So in terms of the decision, I approve the recommendations as set out in the report. Thank you.
Okay, now on to item 9. Tom, you're bringing this one, Temporary Accommodation Partnership.
Thank you. This report proposes bringing into use empty residential accommodation to use as temporary accommodation for homeless families. This will also contribute to mitigating the substantial budget pressures that we're currently facing in this type of housing provision. In essence, we'll be entering into a short-term lease agreement with University Hospitals Bristol and Western NHS Foundation Trust for 24 flats at Eugene Street, and seeks approval for up to 600k to bring the properties back into use. The Trust are happy to consider a new lease if their proposed redevelopment is delayed, and sort of some of the key elements of this deal are as follows. The Trust will not expect any rent until the Council has recovered its capital investment in bringing the properties up to a lettable standard, and this will be on an open book accounting basis. The initial lease of vacant units will start before the hospital tenants have moved into Montague to enable the Council to have use of vacant properties for the maximum amount of time, given the pressures that we currently have with housing. It'll be a full repairing lease, so the Council will be responsible for all repair and maintenance during the lease period. The Council should not be obliged to return the property in any better state of repair and condition than at the start of the date of the lease. The Council will surrender its existing lease of number 9 Eugene Block, Eugene Street, Bristol, on expiry of the new lease of the property, and the Trust will also pay us a premium of £215,000 for the surrender of the lease payable to the HRA. And just in terms of who will be letting these properties to, it will be with a focus on families with low support needs. As part of this deal, we've also sought and received assurance from the Trust that with their eventual plans to redevelop the site, that it will not be for additional car parking and instead will be for additional clinical provision. And we've also provided a copy of the letter as referred to in Appendix A around this assurance. This is a proposal that will have a positive impact on both the households who are supported and the communities that they're living in. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom. We've had one public forum statement on this. That's from Tony.
Thank you, and thank you, Tom, for bringing this agenda item. And I think this agenda item is also a timely reminder that all through new build housing tends to generate and dominate much of the debate and headlines is not the only source of additional housing provision available. Clearly, working in partnership with our partner organisations to make empty or underused existing properties available is a key role to play. It also has we have the potential, as we go through changes in working practices, to repurpose existing buildings that may no longer be required for their current or previous use to further increase the supply of housing and hopefully especially affordable housing. Reuse of existing buildings also, of course, should lead to much reduced carbon emissions, but this will also help us tackle that problem as well. I welcome this decision being made today, and congratulations to Tom for bringing it forward.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Much appreciate that. We've had no questions on this one, and obviously that light for ongoing engagement in the scheme. I'm sure you'll be happy to talk to people and let them know how things are going and take contributions as well. Cabinet members, Kai.
Yeah, just briefly, because I've had quite a long-standing history of this site. I think when I first became a councillor, I was involved in the campaign against the car park. So I just welcome the fact that the 24 flats have been brought back into use when they've been pretty much empty for the last 4 or 5 years. Given the housing crisis, I think that's a bit of a disgrace. So this deal brings them back into use, and it's good to see we've got the commitment from the Trust that they won't revisit the car park proposal, and that they just any long-term proposals for the site are around clinical use only. But one thing I would say to them, given their workforce issues as well and the trouble they've got with recruiting and retaining nurses, is that potentially they should consider maybe a mixed use on the site if they are going to develop it, and they should be looking at key worker housing as well. So if there's any way we can broker those conversations, I would fully support that.
Yeah, I just hand back to you in a second, Tom, but I'd say on that point, it is something that we've been exploring about how we support, particularly our public sector partners who are now facing a situation where their staff either can't afford to live in the city, and if they're not living in the city, are facing the prospect of not being able to afford to get into the city as well on transport because of the financial constraints. So it's a live conversation we're picking up outside of here. But Tom, let me hand back to you now to take the decision which I support and which will now be displayed on the screen.
Thank you, and again, agree. It's a live discussion we need to have with them on an ongoing basis. I think there's some probably car parks that we could put more Hope Rise style schemes on that could be focused on key workers, for example. So welcome the ongoing dialogue on that. And in terms of the decision to be made today, I approve the recommendations as set out in the report.
Thanks, Tom. So on to agenda item 10, Bristol Local Plan, Local Development Scheme. Nicola?
Thanks, Marvin. This is the beginning of the next stage of the Bristol Local Plan, which I'm so very pleased to be here talking about it, because it's a big part of the work I do in this role. So there is like a kind of procedural and legal element to actually bringing the local development scheme here today, and really that's based on publishing for the first time the key milestones and how we plan to bring the local plan forward between 22 and 2024. I won't dwell too much on this paper. It's short and sharp, which is what I guess we like, and there's a few questions, so we'll get to the questions quite rapidly. It also just gives an indication of the nature in which the decisions on the local plan will be made at full council, and I think that's one of the peculiarities of the local plan, is that it is not a cabinet decision, and so when I answer questions today, I may be giving my opinion, not necessarily speaking on behalf of the working group themselves. And likewise, there's just a small reference in the paper to the additional resource that is required following the removal of the SDS as a kind of planning vehicle that we had originally. There's some information in the paper, you can see that for yourself, but essentially we've had to recruit some additional resource in our strategic city planning team in order to fulfil the role that the SDS would otherwise have required at a West of England level. I'll pause there. There's many more discussions to be had on the local plan in the coming months, and I welcome that and make way for questions and statements. Thanks, Marvin.
Thanks, Nicola. So we've received one public forum statement on this, and this is from Dave Redwell on behalf of South West Transport Network, but I think Dave's not with us today, unfortunately. He's still in hospital. Okay, well, I'm sure he's watching on YouTube anyway. I know our committee is. So, Dave, if you're watching in, wishing you all the best. We had 6 public forum questions in total. One was, I think, 2 were from Dave. So let's move on to the next 2 from Bristol Tree Forum. Mark Ashdown.
Yeah, I mean, Marvin, if I can, Mark, if you don't mind, I was just going to your point about Dave, I suspect he is watching us from his hospital bed, so I did commit to him that I'd try and answer his questions very briefly.
Oh, right. Okay,
if
please.
that's okay with you,
Yeah,
I'd
jump
make
in.
a small exception as a committed member of the Council's public forum. So his first question was around, sorry if I've messed up the computer system, by the way, I'll be very quick. The first question is around how transport and planning and housing work together in lieu of an SDS. I think it's a very good flag. It's one of the unintended consequences of no longer progressing an SDS in the west of England. But just to reassure Dave, there is a huge amount of work happening behind the scenes between both the council leaders and yourself, Marvin, as you're more than aware, and also the cabinet leads in the different authorities to actually come together sort of bilaterally, I guess, essentially, to actually make sure that we're all singing off the same hymn sheet and that we continue to have a joined up transport strategy that actually gets people from where they live to where they work. And the second question was related to COP, I think. I mean, I think you can, we come on to this actually in some of the questions, but yes, we fully intend to go beyond what was in the 2014 local plan, and I think this iteration will reflect the kind of changing nature of how much we understand about the role that local nature presents, particularly in urban places. We'd have liked that discussion to be happening at a sub-regional level because nature doesn't follow boundaries of cities and spaces, but regardless of that, we'll continue to have that through the local plan. And as he's alluded to in his question, the forthcoming local plan consultation will no longer propose that residential developments on Brislington Meadows or the Yew Tree Farm land will be progressed in our local plan. Hopefully that gives Dave some... Well, Dave, if you are watching us, hopefully that gives you some reassurance on both those points. Sorry, Marvin.
Thanks, Nicola. No, that's all good. So let's go on to Bristol Tree for Mark Ashdown. Did you want to ask your first question, Mark?
Thank you, Mayor. Excuse me. I'm referring particularly to, I don't know if my question's been put up before the committee, whether they can read
We've had copies of it, but you can ask it.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Fine, I should read it out then. The document of Bristol Local Development Scheme 22 to 24 states, subject to the plan review, will incorporate approaches to strategic policies indicated in the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, of course, allocate sites for development to assist in meeting the development requirements to designate land for protection of specific planning purposes. Specific needs to be addressed will include new homes, land for workforce and education. And I refer to paragraph 8 of the NPPF, which sets 3 strategic goals to be set out. Achieving sustainable development means the planning system has 3 overarching objectives which are interdependent and need to be pursued in mutually supportive ways so that opportunities can be taken to secure net gains across each of the different objectives. And there are 3 of those. The first is A, economic objective, B, a social objective, and C, the environmental objective. My question relates to the last C. The environmental objective is to protect and enhance our natural, built and historic environment.
Have you got the question there, Mark?
I think I'm just getting this question.
Okay.
Including making effective use of land, improving biodiversity, using natural resources prudently, and minimizing waste pollution and mitigation. My first question is, why does the review not include the third of the 3 overarching NPPF objectives, the environmental objective?
I don't know why you think that's the case, Mark. It is part of the Bristol local plan. This paper you've got in front of you is not the Bristol local plan. This is just a statutory first step to set out the programme and resources, as I talked about. But please be reassured that the economic, social and environmental objectives of NPPF are fully reflected in the local plan review.
Did you have a supplementary or your second question?
Well, I'll just move to my second question.
Okay.
will the review include policies which incorporate the recent declarations of 1, climate and ecological emergencies, and 2, the Council's unanimous resolution to protect the green belt and Bristol's green spaces?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I mean, I think it'd be pretty daft if I sat here and said that it didn't reflect both the declaration of the climate and ecological emergencies. They both sit very much at the heart of this new local plan. I just talked in response to Dave's question about the protection and the kind of newer understanding of sites like Yew Tree Farm, for instance, and the contribution they make to the green infrastructure of this city. Yes, the answer is all of that is reflected in the local plan. As I said right at the very beginning, the local plan is shaped and ultimately determined by full council, but from a group, a cross-party working group. That responsibility is taken very seriously, and as part of those workshops recently, actually over the past about 12 weeks, we've been working through site allocations to make sure that the proposals that we put in our consultation reflect the needs of the city, and that includes the Greenbelt discussions.
Do you have a supplementary?
Just if I could ask you, Nicola, you said earlier about Yew Tree Farm, Brislington Meadows, and was it the Western Slopes, that they would no longer be designated for housing or planning development. Is that correct?
The question was in reference to Yew Tree Farm and Brislington Meadows, both of which are not part of not currently being consulted on as being suitable for housing. That's correct.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so next up we have a question from Councillor Katja Hornchin. Katja.
I would just like to ask the Cabinet Member for Planning to provide an update on the development of Bristol's emerging local plan and whether the controversial greenfield sites are included.
Thanks, Katja. I always hate it when people ask questions from the Labour group because I feel like I'm talking with my back to you, which is a slightly strange seat to be sat in. I mean, we've talked about this already. Obviously, one of the biggest reflections, because although the 2014 local plan is there, we did also consult in 2019, which then had to be paused for the JSP. So I'm sat here for a second time talking about these site allocations. And what's been incredibly clear to me, as I said, is since the declaration of the ecological emergency and climate emergency, is just how much more we understand about the contribution that these particular certain green spaces in the city make to our broader city picture. Brislington Meadows, as I said earlier, being one of those sites, and as you know, I'm sure members in the room who are part of the working group will remember we have been through that discussion, and Brislington Meadows is one of those sites that is no longer being proposed to be allocated for housing. Having said that, those homes need to be built somewhere else. So there is no quick fix, there's no backdoor way out of this conundrum about the number of homes we need to build in the city. And so, you know, it's just important to remember that that doesn't mean we're going to deliver 600 less homes, for instance. That just means that they won't be built at Brislington Meadows and they'll be built somewhere else.
Do you have a supplementary, Katja?
Yes, I just wanted to know, as an emerging local plan becomes more developed, it holds more weight in planning terms. Will this have an impact on whether the planning inspectorate decides to approve Homes England's plans or not? I'm specifically talking about Brislington Meadows in this point, but I think some of the other greenfield sites possibly could be included in this. Are you able to confirm whether we know that this site's going to be removed from the plan?
It's a slightly dangerous game to try and anticipate what a planning inspector might conclude with an active appeal. So I won't be drawn into that, I'm afraid, Katja. But what I would say is that as a local plan progresses through its process, it gathers material weight, and that will continue, you know, in spite of the activities of Homes England and the choices that they make in terms of appealing a planning decision or a lack of a planning decision, as the case may be. You know, we will continue with the cross-party work we're doing, and that currently includes Brislington Meadows not being suitable for housing.
Thank you very much. Next question from Marley. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Marvin, and thanks, Nicola. So in 2020, the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson imposed a 35% uplift on the larger cities' housing targets. It's fair to say a lot has happened since then, including another former Tory Prime Minister scrapping these housing targets. I was just wondering if you've got a view on removing the 35% uplift from the emerging local plan.
Thanks, Marley. Yes, great question. I think it's slightly soul-destroying to be planning for a city's future based on the manifesto commitment of a Prime Minister from 2 Prime Ministers ago. It's fair to say, obviously, until this weekend, that number had not been reconfirmed by the current government, but Michael Gove came out on Saturday to say that they maintain committed to delivering 300,000 homes a year. I'll be very quick in my response, but it's worth noting that the only reason this 35% uplift manifested itself in the top 20 cities in the country was because when they did the maths on the actual housing need algorithms, it did not equal 300,000 homes a year. And so what I prefer to do, and the proposal that we'll be consulting on in the few weeks, is that actually we take an evidence-based approach to our housing growth, actually considering the land that does exist in this city, rather than a top-down approach which comes from a government manifesto commitment that I don't think anyone ever truly believed would be met.
Do you have a supplementary, Marley?
Yeah, thank you, Marvin. Thank you for that answer, Nicola. That's sort of really positive to hear, because it should allow us to both deliver the homes that Bristol obviously needs, whilst letting us protect crucial green spaces sites. On that point, considering how developed Bristol obviously is, but the opportunities to deliver housing in the neighbouring local authorities, I was wondering if the uplift gives any scope for setting housing targets on a regional basis. This should better allow us to build the homes we all need, but ensure all authorities play their part in delivering housing.
Yeah, thank you. I think that goes back to that sub-regional point that we talked about earlier. I don't need to dwell on, but I think one of the important things to consider is that no blade of grass in this region is worth more than another necessarily. So one of the difficult decisions that the local plan working group need to work out is, what is the number? Fundamentally, what is our housing need and what is our housing capacity? We are in a period of great change in terms of government's view of planning, and obviously a few weeks ago it was different again to where we might well be now under Michael Gove. I think one of the key things to watch out for is a further commitment from government on a duty to cooperate. I think it's really, really important. We have a duty to cooperate locally, and we'll continue to work with our neighbours, but that is a legal instrument that we, in the lieu of an SDS, we will look to depend on. I think the whole region is ready for this, to be fair. When we speak to our political neighbours, they may not be from our political party, but actually we work very well together. And I think together we will look to plan this region responsibly. I don't think anyone's afraid of talking about growth, but I think what is important to be done is that it's evidence-based, as I said earlier, and it's based on its merits as we plan where homes will go in the next 20 years.
All right, thank you. And you referred to it a couple of times in there, but the failure to deliver the SDS at the regional level brings us some risk. I just the thing I'll just pick up on as well, something you said, Nick, was just this relationship between homes and delivery. We need to solve the housing crisis as much as we can, but for every objection we get to homes going on one piece of land, it'd be great to hear people say where they do want the homes to go, because a whole series of objections does not actually help us solve the housing crisis. And what we get is a lot of objections, but we don't get much advocacy actually for specific sites. And that's the hard yards, when you begin to point to a particular piece of land and say homes are going to go here, or begin to talk about density and height as well. But thank you. Can I ask any cabinet members if they wanted to contribute here? No? Great. Okay, thank you. Let me hand back to you, Nicola, for any final words and to take the decision, which I support and which will now be displayed on the screen.
Thanks, Marvin. I mean, just quickly on that, actually, I would give props to Catherine Withers at Yew Tree Farm, because she regularly sends me pieces of brownfield land and says, why don't you build some homes on here? And we have a good back and forth while we look at potential sites around the city where growth absolutely should be. And so I think she does make that contribution, which is a very welcome, Catherine, if you watch this at some point. So in terms of the decision, to be made today, I approve the recommendations as set out in the report. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So agenda item 11, Household Support Fund. This is with you for October 22 to March 23. Craig, you're bringing this item.
Yeah, thanks, Marvin. Following the then Chancellor's announcement in May 2022, Bristol will receive £4 million to support those in need with the cost of food, energy and water bills and other essential household items for the period October 22 to March 23. This is the third round of funding under the Household Support Fund scheme, with criteria being the same as before, but without the need for any grant to be ring-fenced to any particular cohort. In previous iterations of this, for example, 33% of it had to be given to the elderly, despite the fact that Bristol's population is not 33% elderly. And our MPs have lobbied in Parliament to get that changed and have been successful in that. The proposed spend is contained in Appendix A of the report, but the main points are that we will be spending £1.9 million on free school meals for children over October, Christmas, February and Easter, £709,000 will be given to various charities to assist low-income households with food and fuel poverty. £395,000 to assist those working-age council tax reduction households who have not received any government cost of living payment. £350,000 to assist or to add to the local crisis and prevention fund. £220,000 to assist care leavers and foster families with food and heating costs, and then the remainder to add to existing agreed priorities within the policy and or other initiatives as the time unfolds. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. So we received no public forum statements on this. We did have one question. Is Christine here? No? Okay, so I'm sure we can send the answer to Christine. That question on national government funding for us as well. Any, in lieu of statements and questions, any cabinet members have a contribution on this? Don?
Just to say that despite the national situation and all the problems that we're suffering with our finance, it's great to see that we're keeping our values at the forefront of what we're doing. Thanks.
Sorry. Can I just, I was just going to come back. You took the words right out of my mouth, Councillor Alexander. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important for our administration that we do whatever we can, even in the midst of a crisis, to ensure that we protect the most vulnerable. So I'm really glad to see, particularly, that we're putting more funding into kind of our holiday hunger and feeding our families, children and young people.
I'll steal a few seconds as well, just to look through the list as is presented in front of me as well. Free school meals. Right, charities to assist low-income households, council tax reduction scheme, local crisis and prevention fund, care leavers and foster families. That list is actually in line with what we're actually trying to get done. We want to be ambitious for the city, but be ambitious in a way that is compassionate and inclusive. And it's in the middle of all this. It is a heartening list to be able to go through. Not enough, but it's it's heartening. Craig, let me hand back to you now to take the decision, which I support and which will now be displayed on the screen.
Yeah, thanks, Marvin. Thanks, everyone, for your comments. In terms of decisions to be made today, I approve the recommendations as set out in the report.
Thank you. And agenda item 12, financial update report, November 2022. This is with you again, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Marvin. The finance report for period 6 is an exception report, and as such reports only on significant financial issues arising and movements since October's period 5, quarter 2 full report to Cabinet. At period 6, the Council is forecasting a risk-adjusted overspend of 12.3 million, which represents 2.9% of the Council's general fund budget. This is a 3.8 million deterioration when compared to 8.5 million at quarter 2. Adults and children's social care and housing benefit subsidy loss on exempt accommodation account for these new pressures. As for quarter 2, this forecast includes 8.5 million, which relates to indicative pay awards and additional inflation risk. The HRA is forecasting a £2 million full-year overspend in line with the Q2 forecast. The the Dedicated Schools Grant continues in line with Q2 to forecast a 19.9 million overspend. This significant in-year deficit on the DSG would bring its carry-forward deficit at the close of 22-23 to 44.6 million. Public Health continues to support no variance to its ring-fence budget. The capital programme forecast variance at quarter 2 is a net 81.7 million underspend, 33.7 of which is in the general fund and 48 million in the HRA. Following the temporary redirection of earmarked reserves to general reserves at quarter 2, Cabinet is asked to approve the supplementary estimates as set out in the appendices A2 to A8 of the report, which include the realignment of those general reserves now to meet spending requirements. Finally, Cabinet approval is requested to submit 2 bids for external funding subject to finance due diligence. The first relates to the heat pump remedy programme, Stream 1, solutions for high density heat pump deployment, and is to be for up to £4 million of funding. The second is for the Net Zero Cities Pilot Cities programme Horizon 2020 and is to be up to 1.5 million euros. Details of these 2 bids are set out in the appendix. In both cases, notification of award or any material variation is to come back to Cabinet under separate report as key decisions due to the related award values. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. So we've had no public forum statements on this report, but we have had 3 public forum questions. The first 2 questions from Councillor Tim White. Ask your first question, Tim.
Thanks, Marvin. Thanks, Craig. It's really point of detail. I mean, we obviously appreciate a lot. The report is very helpful. Craig, appreciate cost of living has driven all our costs up. It was just the one line in section 3 about the 5.1 million savings that were savings plans that were at risk, and I just wanted to see if we could get a bit more detail and any mitigation plans about that.
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, the 5.1 is included in the overspend overall, but specifically, it's common activities, the corporate landlord model, review of home choice processes, the home to school transport commission arrangements, and the adult social care transferal of rehabilitation services. They have been mitigated through the supplementary estimates, which are included in the papers that you've got there. Yeah, and that's probably all I need to say. Yeah.
You just want to go to your second question, Tim?
For the budget meetings that are coming up, looking at this budget scrutiny meetings. So that would be great if we can get that a bit more laid out. But thank you for the answer, Craig. Much appreciated.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, obviously, the budget meetings, the scrutiny meetings will be for next year. So we're hoping that, you know, the previous issues will be resolved by next year. But yeah, of course. Yeah.
Thanks. And we also have a question from Tony.
Thank you. I've calmed down quite slightly since writing this question in the statement. But nevertheless, first of all, congratulations to the new Prime Minister. He's lasted 14 days. That's at least he's getting somewhere. I guess my question is really about, I know how hard a wide range of people are working within this council to try and address the budgetary problems that we are facing. And I just wondered if you could give us some idea of the impact of the delays to the announcement of the financial statement and other such information is having on our ability and the extra work that's being required for us to try and address the problems we're facing.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. I mean, in your question, you talk about the October the 31st date. Obviously, that's now been moved again to November the 17th, and that just makes things even more difficult than they already were to plan for the year ahead. And even then, as you know, even within the autumn statement, we'll get headlines, but we won't get the actual local government finance settlement until December sometime. So actually trying to make informed decisions now for things that I have only a very vague idea of what the Chancellor might have in mind come November is next to impossible, and it's no way to run a country as far as I'm concerned. So it causes us issues. We'll go out to consult next week on a raft of changes based on a budget gap that might fundamentally change within 2 weeks. And that's not a great way to run anything, is it? So I'm with you. It isn't a nightmare, and it seems to be getting worse every time you look at it.
Do you have a supplementary, Tony? I will say we just had a chat the other day about reaching out to LGA to find out what guidance they may be given about how to structure the conversation, if they're saying anything to other local authorities as well. I think they've talked a lot about the gap and what government needs to do to make up the gap to support local government, but actually navigating an unprecedented amount of turbulence in the political context in which we're operating, we just got to press them to see if we can kind of get some alignment in the way we all go about it. All right. And happy to talk to you about that as well. Okay, so I think I'm going to hand back to you now. Oh, sorry, cabinet members. Sorry, got that now. Okay. Well, let me hand back to you now, Craig, to take the decision which I support and which will now be displayed on the screen.
Yeah, thanks, Marvin. I mean, we're in an unprecedented position as a council and as a country, actually, and the councils up and down the land are trying to make decisions right now. And if the Chancellor is going to lop another 10% off departmental budgets, which is what he's talked about, or 15% maybe, then, well, it's a disaster for every bit of public sector. And I can't even countenance what it might mean. Anyway, in terms of the decisions to be made today, I approve the recommendations as set out in the report.
Thank you, Craig. So that's the end of today's Cabinet meeting. Thank you to everyone for attending, Cabinet members, councillors, members of the public. The date of the next Cabinet meeting is Tuesday, the 6th of December. And maybe see you then.